Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. It was on one of those particularly damp and disagreeable October afternoons that Hercule Poirot and I found ourselves rumbling through the English countryside in a motorcar decidedly more enthusiastic than I was about the journey. Rain lashed the windows with all the enthusiasm of a stage actor in his final act, and the sky brooded above us like a judge unsatisfied with the defense. "Remind me again, Poirot," I said, adjusting my collar as thunder rumbled somewhere ahead of us, "why we accepted this invitation." Poirot, bundled beneath a lap blanket and quite untouched by the chill, gave me one of his knowing smiles. "Because, mon ami, the great Sir Cedric Renfield is a man of peculiar interests. And you know how I adore peculiarities." Renfield Manor, as it turned out, was a great Gothic structure with an unfortunate amount of turrets, the kind that looked as though it had secrets lurking behind each velvet curtain. It had recently been outfitted, to Sir Cedric's great delight, with a thoroughly modern electrical system designed by his nephew Henry, a nervous fellow, as we would soon learn, who worshipped technology with the same reverence some men give to gods. We were welcomed by Beatrice, the housemaid, who greeted us with a sort of weary courtesy and led us inside. As we were shown to our rooms, I couldn't help but notice how the corridors lit up as we moved, lights that turned on without a switch, reacting to our motion. "Most unsettling," I murmured. Poirot chuckled. "Ah, but Hastings, to unsettle is often to reveal. I have a feeling our visit will be instructive." He said it so lightly, but there was already a glint in his eye, as if he had smelled trouble the moment we arrived. Dinner that evening was a curious affair. The dining room itself was tastefully furnished, though the overall effect was somewhat spoiled by the glow of overly modern wall fixtures. Sir Cedric himself sat at the head of the long table, white-haired and sharp-eyed, with a presence that managed to command even the flickering lights into submission. "To progress," he toasted, raising a glass. "And to Henry, whose genius has brought my home into the modern age." We all dutifully raised our glasses. Henry, seated beside his uncle, looked both proud and faintly embarrassed. Across from me sat Miss Lydia Maythorne, a schoolteacher by trade, and, I gathered, a close companion to Sir Cedric in recent months. She was a quiet, intelligent woman, with a reserved grace and a sharpness behind the eyes that reminded me, oddly, of Poirot himself. Everything might have continued as expected had the lights not begun to misbehave. At first, it was only a flicker, a slight dimming, like a candle catching its breath. Then, halfway through the roast duck, the entire chandelier above us blinked violently before plunging the room into a brief, disorienting darkness. A second later, the lights returned. "Ah," Henry said, laughing nervously. "Just a little recalibration. The system is adjusting to the atmospheric pressure." Poirot leaned slightly forward. "It is a most interesting system, Monsieur Henri. Does it always blink when someone is telling a lie?" Laughter followed his remark, though Henry's smile faltered. Sir Cedric waved a dismissive hand. "A few teething issues, nothing more." Still, I noticed how Lydia's hand trembled slightly as she set down her wineglass, and how Beatrice, hovering with the dessert tray, muttered something about foolish machines under her breath. Poirot, I observed, was watching all of them very carefully indeed. That night, the storm reached its crescendo. Rain pounded the tall windows like a madman demanding entrance, and the wind howled through the chimneys with a voice as old as the stones that built them. I had just begun to doze, the hum of the manor's machinery lulling me to sleep, when a sound like thunder indoors startled me awake. A great metallic crash, followed by sudden and absolute darkness. I fumbled for my bedside lamp. Nothing. The light-sensitive hallway panels. Nothing. The entire manor had gone dark. A door slammed somewhere in the corridor, followed by hurried footsteps. I threw on my dressing gown and stumbled into the hall, where a faint glimmer of light flickered from someone's torch ahead. "Poirot!" I called. "I am here, Hastings," came the calm reply. "Please, come with care. Something has occurred." We found ourselves joined by Henry, wide-eyed and pale, clutching a toolbox, Beatrice clutching a candle, and Dr. Burney, a visiting physician who was hastily fastening his jacket. At the foot of the grand staircase, Sir Cedric stood shouting commands. "She's gone!" Beatrice cried. "Miss Maythorne! Her room is empty!" We rushed to Lydia's chambers. The door was ajar, her bed untouched, the window wide open, rain soaking the sill, and there, just at the edge of the landing, a smear of blood. In the garden, someone found her handbag. Nothing else. Poirot was strangely silent. He walked to the window, then to the hallway, then bent down to inspect something near the banister. At last, he straightened and turned to me with a look I knew too well. "Mon ami," he said softly. "These lights, they do not flicker at random." I swallowed. "You think something's happened to her?" Poirot nodded once. "Yes, Hastings, and I believe the lights have lied to us." The manor, once humming with quiet mechanical efficiency, had fallen into a deep, almost sinister silence. The lights blinked back on, one by one, as if waking from a troubled dream, illuminating startled guests and creaking floorboards. Beatrice was the first to speak. "She's not in her room," she cried, breathless as she descended the staircase in a flurry. "Miss Maythorne, she's gone." Gone. The words seemed to echo through the house like a ghost of its own. Poirot raised a hand calmly. "Let us not leap to conclusions. Mademoiselle Maythorne is a woman, not a puff of smoke." "But she's vanished," Beatrice insisted. "And look!" She pointed to the first turn of the grand staircase. There, glistening in the flickering hallway light, was a thin trail of blood. Just a smear along the polished wood rail and a single drop near the base. It might have gone unnoticed had we not been looking for something to fear. Henry arrived moments later, breathless, still clutching a wrench as though it might be of some practical use. "The generator reset unexpectedly," he gasped. "It shouldn't have happened. The backup was supposed to take over." Dr. Burney joined us then, muttering something about heart palpitations and the dangers of excitement at his age, though his eyes were scanning the scene with medical precision. Sir Cedric thundered down the steps. "What's all this noise?" Beatrice repeated her cry. Miss Maythorne was missing, and that blood could be anything, Sir Cedric snapped. "A scratch. She probably went out for air or a walk. She's prone to dramatics." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A woman afraid of the dark does not go walking in the storm, monsieur." The silence that followed was thunderous. Poirot knelt beside the staircase, his eyes narrowing at the blood smear as he reached into his pocket for a handkerchief, dabbing delicately at the polished wood. He stood and glanced toward the open front door, where the wind still whispered through the hedges, and the rain had started to soften into mist. A small handbag, half hidden beneath a bush, lay open, its contents scattered slightly, but not stolen. "Curious," Poirot murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "No struggle here, no broken strap, no desperation." "What are you thinking?" I asked. Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and ascended the staircase, pausing at Lydia's doorway. Beatrice trailed behind, biting her lip anxiously. The room was pristine. Oddly so, the bed untouched, the lamp still turned to the on position, though no light shone from it. The torch she normally kept by her bedside was missing. Poirot picked up a book lying open on the side table, Jane Eyre. She was reading, he said, glancing at the bookmarked page. Chapter 21. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. Ah, how poetic, I blinked. Do you suppose it means something? Poirot smiled thinly. It always means something, Hastings. The question is, what? Then, almost absently, he picked a strand of cloth from the edge of the window frame. He examined it briefly, then looked toward the hallway. We must speak to Henry again about his beloved lights. They failed, I said. That's obvious. No, mon ami, he said, his voice suddenly sharp. They did not fail. They acted. That is different. The lights, they told a story, but I suspect they told the wrong one. And with that, he turned, his eyes glittering. The lights, Hastings. They have lied to us. The morning after Miss Maythorne's vanishing, the manor sat cloaked in an uneasy hush. Though the rain had ceased, and weak sunlight filtered through the high windows, the storm within the house had far from passed. Poirot was already awake when I found him in Lydia's room, his posture ramrod straight, hands clasped behind his back. The scent of jasmine still lingered faintly in the air, an oddly floral intrusion into what had otherwise been a room of pure order. She was particular, Poirot murmured, eyes scanning the neat lines of the bookshelf, the carefully folded shawl on a chair, the slippers aligned at the foot of the bed. A woman who arranged her life as she arranged her nightstand, precisely. I suppose that makes the disappearance all the more peculiar, I offered. Indeed, Poirot replied. Observe, Hastings. The lamp switch turned on, yet it emits no light. A torch missing from her nightstand. And this. He picked up the open copy of Jane Eyre, the spine bent at a very deliberate page. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. Poirot closed the book gently. A message? Or merely a reflection of her mood? I frowned. You think she planned to disappear? He did not answer at once. Instead, he crouched at the corner of the room, where a small scuff mark on the floor indicated the subtle shift of a heavy object. He ran a finger along it thoughtfully. I think, mon ami, he said at last, that this room tells a story. But like all good stories, it has a narrator, and that narrator, I fear, is unreliable. What do you mean? Poirot stood. I mean that the light, the modern convenience of this house, may be playing a role. A story shaped not by the absence of light, but by its manipulation. To me, it sounded like philosophy, but for Poirot, it was already deduction. We found Henry Renfield in the estate's control room, a curious chamber in the west wing that resembled something between a submarine and a laboratory. Cables trailed like vines across walls lined with switches, blinking lights and ticking meters. Henry was hunched over a console, muttering to himself as he adjusted the calibration of something called an adaptive lighting grid, a feature he explained with more pride than clarity. I suppose, I said as we entered, that explains why the lights flicker when someone sneezes. Henry jumped. Captain Hastings! No, well, it's a bit more sophisticated than that. It's responsive, sensitive to atmospheric data. The flicker last night was anomalous. Poirot folded his arms. An anomaly that coincided with the disappearance of Mademoiselle Maythorne. Henry turned pale. You don't think I... Good heavens, no. I was in the basement trying to stabilize the backup relay. I swear it. Poirot did not press him directly. Instead, he wandered the room, occasionally tapping a dial or peering at a switch with amused disdain. This system, Poirot said. "It is elaborate." Henry brightened. "Yes, entirely modern. The whole estate runs off a time sequence with sensor overrides. It's revolutionary." "Perhaps," Poirot said dryly, "but revolutions often end in disaster." Henry faltered. Poirot's tone softened. "Tell me, monsieur, what was your relationship with Mademoiselle Maythorn?" Henry shifted uncomfortably. "I barely knew her. She was close with Uncle Cedric, always talking about education and charities. She didn't trust the system, thought my innovations were dangerous." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And you, the inventor, took offense?" Well, yes, but not in a violent way." Poirot turned, suddenly serious. "And the inheritance. Were you aware that Sir Cedric intended to place Lydia in control of his charitable trust?" Henry's jaw dropped. "What? That's not possible." Poirot tilted his head. "Then perhaps, monsieur, someone lied to you. Or perhaps someone lied to her." He paused beside a cabinet with backup generator logs. With a single finger, he wiped a smudge of oil from the surface. Then he simply said, "Merci," and walked out. Henry, stunned, didn't follow. As I hurried after Poirot, I said, "You believe Henry tampered with the power deliberately?" Poirot shrugged. "I believe Henry lies poorly. That is all, Hastings. But poor liars are often dangerous, not because they deceive, but because they believe they are clever." I didn't quite understand it then, but I had learned by now. When Poirot left a room silent, it meant he was already several steps ahead. We found Beatrice Lane in the drawing room, furiously polishing a silver tray that already gleamed. She was a wiry woman with a sharp jaw and a pair of eyes that could have sliced bread. Every movement of hers seemed to carry an undercurrent of irritation toward the furniture, the weather, the guests, and certainly Poirot. "I suppose you're here to poke into what's not your business," she said, not looking up as we entered. Poirot, ever polite, inclined his head. "Only if what is not my business becomes a matter of justice, mademoiselle." She huffed. "Justice, is it?" That'd be a first in this house. I watched her with curiosity. "You don't seem very fond of Miss Maythorn." Beatrice's cloth paused mid-stroke. "She wasn't one of us, always acting so high and mighty. Thought because she had her nose in a book she knew everything. Well, maybe books teach you manners, but they don't teach you kindness." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "You felt she was unkind?" "She was polite," Beatrice muttered, "in that way that makes you feel like you're being pitied." She turned to face us, now clutching the tray to her chest. She had Sir Cedric wrapped around her little finger, if you ask me, and he was going to change everything. Charity funds, wages, even the staff. Said it was all Miss Maythorn's suggestion. "You feared for your position?" Poirot asked. "I've served in this house since before Henry could tie his shoes," she snapped. "Then this woman shows up and suddenly it's all modernization and moral responsibility. What about loyalty?" I glanced at Poirot, who appeared to be considering something. Before I could speak, Beatrice's voice rose again. "And for the record, I didn't snoop. I was checking to see if she'd left behind a clue. It's not as if the police are doing much, is it?" Poirot nodded slowly. "And what did you find?" Beatrice hesitated. "Nothing. Just books, perfume, and that ridiculous torch she kept like a child with a nightlight." "A torch?" I repeated. Beatrice frowned. "Well, no, it wasn't there. Just the empty slot in her drawer where she kept it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, mademoiselle," he said. "You have been most helpful." Beatrice looked slightly baffled by the gratitude. And I was too, until I noticed Poirot delicately sniff the edge of the silver tray as we left. "Jasmine," he murmured, "and not Miss Maythorn's usual lavender." Dr. Felix Burney was in the conservatory when we found him. seated stiffly among potted ferns and clutching a teacup like it might betray him. He was a man of few words, with an angular face that might have once been handsome before years of tension creased it. He looked up as we entered. "I assume this isn't a social visit." "Non," said Poirot cheerfully. "We are simply trying to clarify the curious events of last night." "Curious?" Bernie echoed. "I call them tragic." I glanced at Poirot, who remained impassive. "You knew Miss Maythorne well?" I asked. Bernie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Once." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, an affair of the heart." The doctor set his cup down with a sharp clink. "We were engaged, briefly, years ago. It ended. Not badly, not violently, it simply ended." "And yet you visited the house on the very night she disappears." Bernie's voice grew tight. "I was invited. By Sir Cedric. Lydia didn't even know I was coming." Poirot paced gently, inspecting the leaves of a plant. "And during the blackout, you were—" "In my car, preparing to leave. I didn't see the point in staying the night." Poirot stopped. "Then how do you explain your boots, monsieur?" Bernie frowned. "What about them?" "They were damp, muddy, from the wine cellar path." Bernie's face changed, ever so slightly. "I stopped to fetch something. I left a bag near the pantry." Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then, "A medical bag?" Bernie's tone shifted. "I didn't harm her, if that's what you're implying." "Imply?" Poirot echoed. No, doctor. I do not imply. I observe." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the ticking of a clock somewhere in the corridor. Poirot smiled. "You are lying about something, but I do not believe it is murder." He turned to me as we left. "He drank, Hastings." "Drank?" "Oui. He used the wine cellar not to hide evidence, but to hide emotion. Pride is a terrible thing in an Englishman, n'est-ce pas? And the bag?" Poirot's voice dropped. "We shall find out soon enough. But note, Hastings, he said he left the house, yet he did not. A contradiction. And the contradictions, they are the fingerprints of truth." We found Sir Cedric Renfield in his study, which more resembled the lair of a retired inventor than that of an aristocrat. The room was cluttered with brass instruments, dusty volumes on electricity and modern architecture, and a singular object that captured Poirot's interest, a copper bust of Volta, beaming proudly from the mantelpiece. Sir Cedric looked up from his desk with a frown. "Oh, not more questions, surely." Poirot bowed courteously. "Only the smallest ones, monsieur. We do not wish to disturb your work." Sir Cedric gestured impatiently. "All this fuss because a woman wandered off in a storm. The lights flickered. The power failed. Hardly a criminal offence." "You believe Miss Maythorne left of her own accord?" I asked. He snorted. "I believe she had a dramatic streak, always did. Everything had to mean something with Lydia. She saw conspiracies in circuit boards." Poirot glanced about the room. "It is a most modern house, a triumph of innovation." Cedric smiled with the pride of a man admiring his own reflection. "Quite. Henry's work. Though I had the vision, I've always believed in the future." "And Miss Maythorne?" Poirot asked mildly. "Did she share this belief?" Sir Cedric's face shifted ever so slightly. "Not exactly. She thought we should spend less time on technology and more on, well, people. Said we ought to redirect our funds, make things less grand, more charitable." "Which would mean transferring power?" Poirot asked softly. Cedric's tone cooled. "She was persuasive, I'll grant you. I'd even begun drafting revisions to our estate trust, but that was months ago." "Was she aware of the changes?" I asked. He waved a hand. "She guessed, perhaps, but nothing had been finalized." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet, if she knew, and if she disapproved—" Sir Cedric's eyes narrowed. "You're not suggesting I—" Good heavens, man. I may be eccentric, but I'm not criminal. Poirot only smiled. Ah, monsieur. Often the two are not so far apart. We left him grumbling, but Poirot's eyes sparkled with that curious light they always held before a storm broke. It was later that afternoon when the discovery was made. We had wandered down to the wine cellar, not, as I hoped, for a restorative drink, but at Poirot's urging. The corridor was narrow and cold, lined with stone and lit only by dim bulbs that buzzed occasionally with the manor's ever-erratic electricity. And then, there it was, a faint bundle, half hidden behind a stack of crates. Poirot stepped forward and knelt, gently lifting it. Lydia's shawl. It was unmistakable. Ivory wool, embroidered at the edge with tiny blue flowers. Poirot held it with great care, as though the fabric itself might speak. It was not dropped, he said. It was placed. By her, I asked. Perhaps, but more likely by someone who wanted it found. He lifted it to his nose, then froze. Jasmine, he whispered. I blinked. But she wore lavender. Just so. Poirot stood, looking around the cellar with narrowed eyes. Tell me, Hastings, why would anyone bring Miss Maythorne's shawl down here? Well, I said, trying to sound clever. Maybe she came down herself, looking for something. Poirot shook his head. Mademoiselle Maythorne was afraid of the dark. Terribly so. The torch she kept by her bed, gone, and this place. He gestured to the damp, unlit corridor. This is no place for a woman alone, least of all one with a fear. But who then? Poirot said nothing. Instead, he began tapping lightly on the cellar walls, his head cocked, listening. A few moments passed. Then he paused before a narrow wood panel set strangely low near the floor. Hastings, he said quietly, do you know what this is? A cabinet? A dumbwaiter shaft, Poirot replied. Long disused, but not abandoned. He pressed gently, and the panel creaked open. A gust of stale air drifted out. Poirot didn't smile. She was here. He said it with such certainty that I shivered. The case I knew then was far from over, and the shadows had only begun to speak. We returned to the control room after a late breakfast, though breakfast itself had been an awkward affair. The mood at the table was brittle. Sir Cedric had glowered, Dr. Burney had picked at his eggs with surgical precision, and Beatrice seemed determined to rattle every teacup, just a bit louder than necessary. Henry was already there, of course, hunched once again over his beloved lighting panel. He jumped as we entered. You again, he muttered. Look, I told you. There was a fault in the sequence. A momentary relay misfire. Nothing malicious. Poirot stepped forward, utterly calm. But what is curious, monsieur, is that the backup generator, how do you say, did not engage as it should. It failed to override the system. That is not momentary. That is intentional. Henry flushed. Are you accusing me of sabotage? Non, said Poirot. I am accusing you of incompetence, but perhaps also misdirection. Henry bristled. I didn't touch the main override. I only made minor adjustments to the timer. Ah, said Poirot softly, but the logbook says otherwise. Henry blinked. What? Poirot produced a small black book, one we had taken from a drawer near the relay cabinet the night before. He flipped it open to a page scribbled in hurried handwriting. Your entry, Poirot said. Dated the day before the disappearance. Adjusted generator delay to 60 seconds for dramatic demo. Henry's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It wasn't supposed to cause harm. It was meant to impress my uncle, show him the blackout protocol could be fine-tuned. A flourish, that's all. Yet someone used that flourish to create confusion, Poirot said. Confusion in which a woman disappeared. Henry sank onto the edge of the workbench, his hands trembling. I never meant for that to happen. I didn't even know Lydia was gone until Beatrice shouted. Poirot nodded slowly. Then you must ask yourself, monsieur, if you did not plan the moment. Who did? He left Henry in silence, the ticking of the control room, the only sound behind us. It was Beatrice who came to us next, though not by invitation. She burst into the drawing room while Poirot and I were reviewing a floor plan of the manor. I remembered something, she announced, arms folded, defiant as ever. About the blackout. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Something new? Beatrice hesitated. I didn't think it was worth mentioning. Thought maybe I imagined it. But I saw someone. My ears perked up. Someone? She nodded slowly. A woman. Just after the lights went out, white nightdress, walking down the hall like a ghost. Poirot's voice was steady. And you are certain it was not Miss Maythorne? That's just it. It wasn't her. Lydia was shorter. This figure was taller, thinner. The walk was wrong, slower, almost gliding. You saw her clearly. As clearly as I could in pitch dark with only flickering hallway lights, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot gave a small nod. And what did she do? She turned the corner toward the west wing. I thought maybe it was one of the other guests, but everyone else was still downstairs. I went to check. No one there. Interesting, Poirot murmured. What do you think it means? I asked. Poirot didn't answer right away. He leaned back in the chair and laced his fingers. It means, mon ami, that someone went to great lengths to make it appear Lydia had vanished, when in fact they had prepared a substitute image. Beatrice looked confused. You mean someone dressed like her? Or someone ensured you would believe it was her, with the right lighting, the right timing, and the right scent? He trailed off. I frowned. You think the lights were used to deceive the eye? Poirot smiled slightly. Mais oui. Light, Hastings, is not only for illumination, it is also for illusion. Beatrice stared at him, mouth slightly open. I didn't imagine it then. No, mademoiselle, Poirot said kindly. You saw precisely what you were meant to see. It was shortly after Beatrice's unnerving account that Poirot turned his focus back to Dr. Burney. The good doctor was seated once more in the conservatory, gazing out into the garden as if answers might sprout among the rose bushes. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside him, untouched since the morning. Poirot approached with his usual serenity, hands clasped behind his back. Ah, doctor, he said smoothly. We meet again. How charming this little nook is, though perhaps a touch damp for reflective thought. Burney glanced up, wariness etched into his brow. I suppose you're here to question me again. But, of course, Poirot replied cheerfully. One must leave no corner unexplored in a house so full of corners. I took a seat opposite the doctor, somewhat less theatrically. I'd like to revisit your timeline, Poirot continued. You said you were in your car during the blackout. That's correct, Burney said stiffly. I left the house just after dessert. The storm was worsening, and I didn't see the point in staying. Poirot tilted his head. Curious. For someone in such a hurry to leave, you took quite the detour. Burney frowned. I beg your pardon. Poirot pointed, not with drama but with deliberate clarity, at the doctor's boots, which sat neatly by the door. They are quite clean now, Poirot said, but last night they were caked in mud. Mud that matched the path leading to the wine cellar. Burney's mouth tightened. I stopped briefly. I remembered leaving my bag in the pantry, so I circled back. A bag? I asked. My medical case. I thought I might need it on the road, should I encounter someone in need. Poirot raised one eyebrow, a movement that conveyed both amusement and doubt. Yet no one recalls you re-entering the house, he said softly. Burney shifted. It was dark, Everyone was preoccupied. Indeed, Poirot murmured. Conveniently so. There was a beat of silence, and Poirot leaned forward, just slightly. You are hiding something, Doctor. Not guilt, but shame, perhaps. Bernie looked away. I wasn't in the pantry, he admitted at last. I was in the cellar, drinking. I blinked. Drinking? Bernie sighed. There's an old bottle of Chateau Lafite hidden behind the third shelf. I needed a moment. Seeing Lydia again stirred up. Regrets. Poirot nodded solemnly. It is often so with the heart, but your secrecy made your footprints appear more suspicious than they are. Bernie exhaled. I didn't harm her, Poirot. I couldn't. Poirot gave a gentle smile. Non, Doctor. But emotion makes for poor alibis, and the cellar, I fear, is not the only place secrets are buried. As we walked back toward the main staircase, I couldn't hold my thoughts in any longer. I turned to Poirot with what I believed was a thoroughly sound theory. Poirot, I began, don't you think this could all be a matter of the heart? Poirot blinked at me, amused. Comment, Hastings. You believe we are in the middle of a romantic tragedy? Well, I said, gathering steam. Lydia clearly had a past with Dr. Bernie. The engagement, the awkwardness. He's still not over her. And then there's Beatrice, full of resentment, as if Lydia's mere presence offended her very existence. Poirot gave a theatrical sigh. Ah, les passions humaines. So dramatic, so volatile. You propose, then, that this is a crime of love? Exactly, I said, warming to the idea. Bernie still loves her. Beatrice hated her. And even Henry resented her interference with the estate. It's all emotion, boiling over. Poirot smiled. And in your opera, who is the villain? I hesitated. Beatrice, perhaps. Or Bernie. He lied, after all. Went to the cellar. Maybe he confronted Lydia. Maybe things turned, well, unpleasant. Poirot stopped at the landing and turned to face me directly, hands steepled. My dear Hastings, he said, you are like the novelist with only one plot. Always love, always heartbreak, always the knife in the chest. It does explain a lot, I mumbled, defensive. Non, mon ami, it explains nothing. Emotion is a useful spice, but logic is the meat of the dish. Let us examine facts, not feelings. He began ticking points off on his fingers. Lydia disappears in a controlled blackout. Her torch is missing. Her shawl is found in the cellar, where Dr. Bernie was. A figure in white is seen by Beatrice. But it was not Lydia. A jasmine scent, foreign to Lydia's habits, was noted. He turned to me. What do these tell us? That someone planned it? Précisément, Poirot said. Planned, coldly, carefully, not the act of passion, but of calculation. The romantic heart you chase, Hastings, is but a decoy. But who would... Poirot raised a finger. Not yet. First we collect the threads, then we weave the tapestry. I sighed. You do love dragging things out. Poirot patted my arm. It is not dragging out. It is the art of the reveal. And though I didn't yet see the picture he was assembling, I knew one thing for certain. It would be nothing like the one I imagined. It was Poirot who insisted we return to the drawing room. At first, I assumed he wanted to sit and rest. He'd been walking all over the manor all morning. But the moment we entered, he walked straight to the fireplace. Do you smell it, Hastings? He said softly, kneeling with surprising grace for a man of his age. I sniffed the air. You mean smoke? No, not smoke. Burned paper. Poirot reached for the brass poker and stirred the ashes gently, his eyes sharp and focused. And paper, Hastings, always carries secrets it resents letting go. He prodded a little deeper, and I caught the edge of something pale, no larger than a postcard, curled at the edges, the corner blackened but the centre intact. Poirot retrieved it with his handkerchief and laid it carefully on the table. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Let us see." The writing was faint, but still legible in parts. It was clearly a letter, typewritten, and possibly drafted on Renfield Manor's own typewriter. The signature was burned away, but certain phrases remained visible. Provision to transfer trusteeship. Miss Maythorne's recommendation. Activation upon death or incapacitation. Keep confidential until formal reading. Poirot sat back, hands steepled, and let out a quiet hum of satisfaction. "What does it mean?" I asked, puzzled. He tapped the paper lightly. "It means, Hastings, that Mademoiselle Maythorne was not merely influencing Sir Cedric's charitable work. She was, in fact, about to control it." I whistled. "A clause in his will." "Oui. Hidden, but now exposed." Poirot stood and faced the window. This document was meant to remain private until Sir Cedric's death. But someone discovered it. Someone who knew that once Lydia was named trustee, certain modern interests would be, how do you say, compromised. I thought of Henry's frantic ambition, Beatrice's resentment, even Bernie's wounded pride. But one figure loomed larger in my mind. "You think Sir Cedric burned it?" Poirot smiled without turning. "Hastings, if you wish to keep something secret forever, would you burn only half of it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. As twilight crept into the manor and long shadows painted the hallways with ominous streaks, Poirot's pace slowed. But it was not the weariness of a tired man. It was the deliberate deceleration of someone approaching the edge of revelation. We passed through the sitting room. Poirot paused to examine a vase, a simple floral porcelain arrangement that had sat unnoticed for days. He lifted it, frowned, and plucked a small pressed flower from the inside lip. "Forget-me-not," he murmured, "so delicately placed. A reminder, perhaps?" I stared. Surely that's just decoration. Poirot tucked the flower into his pocket. "Nothing, mon ami, is ever just anything." Next came the corridor near Lydia's room. Poirot stopped abruptly and examined the junction box where the motion-triggered hallway lights connected. "Snipped," he murmured, crouching. "Cleanly. And not last night, but earlier. This tampering was prepared. But Henry said..." Henry lied about his timeline, but not for crime, for pride. He rose and moved to the far end of the corridor, where an ornate cabinet stood against the wall. He opened it without hesitation and pulled out a stub of wax, once part of a candle, now charred at the base. "No electricity here last night," Poirot said. "And yet, someone wanted to see clearly." I was baffled. "A candle, a flower, a wire. Poirot, what are you really seeing?" He turned to me, eyes bright with certainty. "Hastings, do you remember what I said? A woman disappeared, yes, but more curiously, a woman was seen who was not there at all." "Yes?" "It was not Lydia they saw. It was an idea of Lydia, a mirage, fabricated, perfect timing, carefully controlled lighting, sent to trick the mind." "Jasmine," I said, slowly understanding. "Précisément. Jasmine to suggest her presence, but she wears lavender." Poirot tapped his head. "Everything has been made to appear natural. A misstep here, a sighting there, each piece nudging us toward the conclusion that she fled or was taken." "But she didn't," I said. Poirot smiled. "No, mon ami. She was hidden." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "By whom?" Poirot's smile vanished. "That, Hastings, is what we shall reveal next." The storm had returned. As dusk gave way to a smothering night, Renfield Manor seemed to sink into itself, shivering with tension. Wind clawed at the stained glass windows of the great library, and the fire roared in the hearth like a creature roused. It was in this theatrical gloom that Hercule Poirot chose to make his final move. The room had been arranged precisely to his liking, chairs drawn in a semicircle, firelight casting elongated silhouettes across the patterned carpet. The overhead light dimmed to a gentle amber glow, flickering like candlelight. I'd seen him do it before, set the stage before unveiling the truth, and yet it never ceased to impress me. The suspects were seated, though I could not say they were comfortable. Sir Cedric lounged stiffly in his armchair, fingers twitching on the armrest as if itching for a brandy. Henry hovered by the mantel, visibly sweating. Beatrice sat ramrod straight, arms folded tightly as if warding off judgment. Dr. Burney stood near the doorway, half in shadow, looking as though he might bolt at any moment. And Poirot paced before them all with the grace of a stage actor awaiting his cue. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm, precise, yet unmistakably charged with energy. "The moment has come. The mystery of Mademoiselle Maythorne's disappearance, of the blackout, the broken alibis, the lies both small and grand, shall now be resolved." Beatrice let out a snort. Sir Cedric frowned, but none spoke. Poirot continued. "You each believe you know the truth, or perhaps that there is no truth to be found. But I, Hercule Poirot, have listened, not just to your words, but to your silences. I have watched not only your actions, but your reactions." The wind howled at the window. Thunder rolled in the distance. Poirot paused dramatically. "And now I shall explain what truly happened the night the lights lied." Poirot turned first to Henry, who shrank slightly beneath the detective's gaze. "Monsieur Henry," Poirot said gently, "your enthusiasm for technology is admirable, even charming. But as with many young men, your pride has made you reckless." Henry swallowed. "I didn't hurt Lydia. I swear it." Poirot held up a hand. "Let us be precise. You tampered with the generator timer. You adjusted the delay to create, as you wrote in your logbook, a dramatic demo. You wished to impress your uncle." Sir Cedric looked at his nephew sharply, but said nothing. Henry flushed. "Yes, it was foolish, but it wasn't meant to do anything else." "And yet," Poirot said, turning slightly toward the others, "his flourish became the perfect veil for a greater deception." He returned his gaze to Henry. "Tell me, when you realized the system had failed to reset, why did you not report the error immediately?" "I was afraid," Henry said quietly. "Afraid they'd blame me for the blackout. I didn't know Lydia had disappeared until later." Poirot nodded. "And when you adjusted the system, who else knew of your plan?" "No one," Henry said quickly. "I swear. No one." Poirot tilted his head. "But someone did know. Someone who used your tampering as a tool, not for demonstration, but for distraction." He stepped closer. "You, mon ami, are guilty of arrogance and silence, but not of cruelty. Your guilt ends at the wires. The true crime belongs to another." Henry let out a breath, half in relief, half in shame. Poirot turned to the rest of the group, arms folded. "You see how easily misdirection can be manufactured? A flicker of lights, a moving shadow, a figure in white. All of it designed to convince you that Mademoiselle Maythorne had simply vanished into the night." He raised a finger. "But it was not the night that claimed her. It was someone far closer." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, and Poirot's eyes, now sharp as a blade, turned to the next suspect. Poirot's gaze now turned to Beatrice Lane, seated rigidly on the edge of her chair, hands clenched into fists in her lap. She met his eyes, defiant despite the palpable tension in the room. "Miss Lane," Poirot began gently, "you are a woman of great strength. I admire this. You see much and say little, but sometimes, when one speaks too late, the truth becomes entangled with illusion." Beatrice said nothing. "You told us," Poirot continued, That you saw a woman in white moving through the hallway during the blackout. That she was not Miss Maythorne. That she was taller, thinner, ghost-like. Beatrice frowned. Yes, I did see her. I'm not going mad. Ah, non, I do not think you mad, Poirot replied with a smile. I think you were frightened, and I think what you saw was yourself. There was a beat of silence. I blinked, half expecting Beatrice to burst out laughing, but she simply stared at Poirot, stunned. Myself? She repeated. That's absurd. Non, said Poirot. It is science. During the blackout, the motion-sensitive lights flickered inconsistently. You stepped into the hallway, and the mirrored cabinet at the far end reflected your image back to you. He walked slowly toward the hearth. Your own nightdress, your own uncertain footsteps, seen through panic and lightning's intermittent glare. It became something other, a phantom, a lie told by your mind. But I wasn't wearing... Poirot raised a hand. You were. The White House coat, oui? You told Miss Maythorne earlier that you wouldn't be changing for people who can't even say good morning. You wore it every night. Beatrice hesitated. I didn't realize. Fear blinds us, mademoiselle. You thought it was someone else, but it was your own reflection. A long pause passed. Then Beatrice's shoulders sank, her expression softening for the first time. I really thought, she murmured. Poirot inclined his head. You thought what someone wanted you to think. You were not alone in that. Poirot turned next to Doctor Burney, who stood near the bookcases with arms crossed and jaw tight. His face bore the exhausted look of a man who had relived the same moment 100 times over. Dr. Burney, Poirot began with surprising gentleness. Yours is a soul tortured not by guilt, but by memory. Burney stiffened. I told you I didn't harm Lydia. Oui, I believe you, said Poirot. But you misled us, not to conceal a crime, but to conceal heartbreak. The room was still. Poirot gestured toward the brandy decanter beside the hearth. You claimed you went to your car, that you left before the blackout, but the mud on your boots, the scent of wine on your breath, the time discrepancy, all said otherwise. Burney didn't answer. You were in the wine cellar, Poirot continued. Not to destroy evidence, not to ambush Lydia, but to drink, alone, in shame. Burney's shoulders sagged. Yes, Poirot's voice softened. You could not bear to face her. You left her once before. You thought you might love again. But when you saw her, you realized the wound never truly healed. Burney looked down. I made a fool of myself. Non, said Poirot. You are not the only man to drown sorrow in a bottle, but your absence from the scene made you appear suspicious. Burney gave a bitter laugh. She was stronger than I ever was. Poirot nodded slowly. Perhaps. But you are not a criminal. You are, as the English say, only human. Burney sank into a chair and covered his face. Poirot gave him a moment, then looked to the room. And now, he said, his voice sharpening, the red herrings are removed. The illusions are dissolved. It is time to expose the one who made them. The air in the library had shifted. The tension, once diffuse and uncertain, had begun to concentrate, slowly but surely, like a storm forming its eye. And at the centre of it stood Sir Cedric Renfield, still seated in his leather armchair, still cloaked in the authority of his name and position. But something had changed. His fingers no longer twitched. His posture had grown rigid, too still. He watched Poirot with a gaze that was no longer dismissive but wary, calculating. Poirot took a step forward. And now, he said softly, we arrive at the end. He turned his full attention on Sir Cedric. You, monsieur, are a man of intellect, a man who adores control. Not merely over machines, but over people. Over perception. Sir Cedric said nothing, but I saw his jaw tighten. You installed this entire estate with a system of lights, of sensors, of automation, not for security, not for convenience, but for power. You created a world in which everything moved at your command, a world that bent to your will. Poirot's tone sharpened. But Mademoiselle Maythorn was not so easily bent. She was misled, Cedric replied stiffly, manipulated by sentimentality. No, said Poirot. She was guided by integrity, and she discovered what you had hoped no one would, that the charitable trust you built was not, how shall we say, entirely charitable. A flicker of anger passed over Cedric's face. Poirot continued, voice rising slightly. You diverted funds to offshore accounts. You used the estate's money not for education, not for society's good, but for your own investments. And when Lydia confronted you, when she threatened to reveal it, you knew you had only one option. Sir Cedric rose slowly from his chair. You're making dangerous accusations, Monsieur Poirot. I make only observations, Poirot said, stepping closer. And I observe that you used Henry's blackout as your curtain. You lured Lydia to the wine cellar under the pretext of a private conversation. You drugged her, with a cloth scented not with her familiar lavender, but with jasmine, foreign and sweet. And then you hid her away. There was a sharp intake of breath from Beatrice. Poirot now stood inches from Sir Cedric. You planned to frame her disappearance as either a suicide or a sudden flight. A woman too fragile to cope. But you did not count on one thing. What's that? Cedric said, his voice low. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. That Hercule Poirot was staying in your house. The room was utterly still. The storm, for a brief moment, seemed to pause in reverence. Sir Cedric sat back down, eyes hollow. He said nothing more. Poirot turned to me with that gleam in his eye, that look I had learned to both admire and dread. Come, Hastings, he said, it is time. We left the library without a word. The others followed hesitantly. The wind howled louder as we descended to the lower floor, the stone beneath our feet cold as ever. Poirot led us to the wine cellar, not the main space, but a narrow passage off to the side, dark and lined with disused shelves. He stopped at a wooden panel halfway up the wall. A dumbwaiter shaft, I murmured, recalling our earlier exploration. Oui, said Poirot, once used to ferry wine from the cellar to the dining room above. Abandoned now, except for one purpose. He knelt and opened the small wooden door. Inside, coiled like a forgotten memory, lay Lydia Maythorn. Gasps broke out behind us. Quickly, Poirot said to Dr. Burney. She is alive. The cloth, see, there, dosed with chloroform, I believe. Jasmine oil to mask the chemical. But the dosage was cautious. She is only sedated. Burney sprang into action. Within minutes, Lydia stirred, blinking into the torchlight, dazed but breathing. Poirot stood and faced the others. He meant to keep her hidden until the storm passed, until suspicion turned to despair, and then to resignation. He would later discover her body, so conveniently found beneath the cliffs, and all would believe she fled or took her own life. Henry looked aghast. Beatrice was shaking. Sir Cedric stood motionless, his face pale. Lydia whispered hoarsely. He said it was just a talk. That he wanted to explain. Poirot nodded solemnly. Yes, mademoiselle, but when the talk did not go as he wished, he chose silence, and built it with wires and shadows. I found my voice at last. And the jasmine cloth? Poirot smiled faintly. That, mon ami, was the final betrayal. For all his precision, Sir Cedric did not know the scent she wore every day. He turned back to the group. You see now, it was not the darkness that deceived you. It was the man who claimed to bring you light. No one spoke. The silence that followed was heavier than any thunder, and Poirot, with one final nod, said simply, "Justice, like truth, requires only a little illumination." The dawn crept in softly, like a curtain drawn across a fevered stage. The storm had passed. Outside, the grounds of Renfield Manor lay silvered with dew and silence. But within the house, silence had taken on a different quality, no longer ominous, but solemn, heavy. Lydia Maythorne had been moved from the cellar to her own room. Dr. Burney, regaining his composure, had declared her out of immediate danger, though weak from exposure and the chloroform. Beatrice, in a rare moment of tenderness, had volunteered to sit by her bedside. Sir Cedric Renfield did not resist when the authorities arrived. Poirot had made the call quietly, giving the inspector all the necessary details. Cedric stood by the window as the constables approached, his expression unreadable. When asked if he had anything to say, he gave only a tight smile. "She was going to destroy my life's work," he said. "I merely acted first." Poirot, standing beside him, replied calmly, "No, monsieur. You attempted to destroy hers. But the human spirit is not so easily extinguished." As the officers led him away, Lydia stirred upstairs, her voice faint but determined. "Is he gone?" Poirot nodded. "He is. You are safe now, mademoiselle." She gave a weak smile. "He said it would only be temporary, just until things quieted down." "Ah," Poirot said. "But the truth, it has a way of making noise when one tries too hard to silence it." I remained by Poirot's side as the house returned slowly to order. Henry stood like a man still awakening from a dream. Beatrice was subdued, and Dr. Burney, though shaken, had returned to his work with quiet efficiency. "What a twisted business," I muttered. Poirot gave a small nod. "Oui, Hastings, twisted, but not senseless. It was a crime not of passion, but of possession. Sir Cedric did not hate Lydia. He merely saw her as inconvenient." I shivered at the word. "But she will recover," I said. Poirot smiled gently. "Yes, and justice, Hastings, has not flickered." Later that morning, as the first true sunlight touched the estate's eastern windows, Poirot and I took our breakfast alone in the conservatory. The orange marmalade was particularly sharp that day, or perhaps it only felt so because my nerves were still catching up with the revelations of the night before. I buttered my toast with more focus than usual. "There's something I still don't quite see, Poirot. How did you know?" Poirot dabbed the corners of his mouth delicately. "Ah, mon ami, you mean, how did I see what others did not?" I nodded. "Exactly. Everyone had a motive or seemed suspicious. Even I thought it might be Burney or Beatrice." Poirot gave a small, indulgent smile. "Because you looked outward, at the drama, the passion, the confusion. I, on the other hand, looked inward. I asked myself not who had reason to act, but who had the means to control perception." He held up one finger. "First, there was the book, Jane Eyre. Lydia had been reading it. The bookmarked page, a woman who vanishes into the night. A romantic symbol, yes, but also a literary warning. Then," he continued, "the generator timer. Altered. That was Henry's doing, yes, but someone knew of it. Someone who used it. That narrowed the field." He poured himself more tea. "The scent. Jasmine. A perfume not worn by Lydia. It was intended to sedate her, but also to confuse the senses. It was a detail only a man unaware of her habits would overlook. And then the latch," he added. "On the dumbwaiter, closed from the outside. Lydia could not have done that herself, but someone with access and authority over the household systems could." "Sir Cedric," I said slowly. Poirot bowed his head. "But what tipped it?" I pressed. "What was the one thing that made you certain?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. The lights, Hastings. The lights lied, but only because they were told to lie, and only he had the power to make them do so, under the guise of modern brilliance. He leaned back, savoring his tea. When everything else flickered, it was logic that remained constant. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Not just the man he had unmasked, but the method behind it. No footprints, no bullet casings, only books, light switches and scent. He had solved the mystery not with a gun or a chase, but with the little grey cells. Brilliant, I said, genuinely. Poirot raised his cup in modest salute. Merci, Hastings. The mind, as I have often said, is the most powerful weapon of all. The events of the previous night had left the household drained, but not defeated. Sir Cedric was gone, taken into custody without struggle, though the scandal of his financial deceit would no doubt echo far beyond Renfield's stone walls. Lydia was recovering steadily, her strength returning with each hour, and Poirot, as ever, seemed untouched by fatigue, sipping his coffee that morning, as if all had unfolded precisely on schedule. But as it turned out, there was still one chapter left. We were seated in the morning room, a brighter place than the heavy confines of the library, with sunlight pouring through the tall windows and birdsong drifting in through the open sash. Lydia sat propped on a cushioned chair near the fire, a blanket around her shoulders. Her pallor had faded, replaced by quiet resolve. Beatrice hovered nearby, oddly subdued. Poirot had just finished regaling Lydia with his theory of the mirrored hallway when she interrupted, her voice soft but steady. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "there is something you should know, something even Sir Cedric didn't discover." Poirot turned to her with interest. "Ah, a secret still hidden?" She nodded. 2 days before the incident. "I changed my will." There was a beat of silence. "Changed it?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "The estate I inherited from my late brother. It was to go toward the scholarship fund, but I decided to designate a specific beneficiary. Someone overlooked." Beatrice shifted. "What are you talking about?" Lydia looked at her gently. "Your daughter, Beatrice." The maid's eyes widened. "She's brilliant," Lydia continued. "And I knew you couldn't afford to send her to the academy in London. She reminded me of myself, quiet, observant, determined. So I named her sole beneficiary of my personal fortune." Beatrice stood still, her mouth slightly open. I didn't know." "You weren't meant to," Lydia replied. "I wanted it to be a surprise, a quiet gift, something to lift her above the world that had kept you both down." Poirot smiled, a slow and approving curve of his lips. "Ah," he said softly. "Poetic justice. Sir Cedric sought to silence you, Mademoiselle Maythorne, to protect a fortune he did not truly control, and in doing so, he lost everything, including the truth." Beatrice looked near tears, though whether from gratitude or disbelief, I could not say. Lydia reached out and took her hand. "She deserves a future," Lydia said, "and perhaps so do you." Poirot stood and adjusted his cuffs. "And thus the case is closed," but with a twist most elegant. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, Hastings, do you recall what I said when this all began?" I blinked. "You said the lights do not flicker at random. They lie." Poirot smiled. "Non, mon ami. They lied for a reason, but the truth, it always shines through in the end." As we stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the house behind us quiet at last, Poirot drew his coat a little tighter and glanced back over his shoulder. "You see, Hastings," he said, "even in a house filled with lights, it is often the shadows that hold the truth. But, with the little grey cells properly applied, The truth always finds its way to the surface. I nodded, still turning over the events in my mind. It's extraordinary, Poirot. All that deceit, hidden in plain sight. And to think, it wasn't the machinery or the tricks, but people that revealed everything. Poirot gave a satisfied smile. Exactement. The psychology, mon ami, the motives, the fears, the pride, these are the fingerprints that never fade. I chuckled. Still, I'll be replacing my electric lamps with candles. At least they don't lie. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Non, Hastings, but they drip. What do you think was the biggest clue that revealed Sir Cedric's guilt? Was it the generator timer, the jasmine scent, or something even subtler? Comment below. We'd love to know what you spotted first. If you enjoyed this classic Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more timeless detective stories to life every week, full of clever twists, red herrings, and the brilliant mind of Poirot himself. And remember, the truth may flicker, but it never fades.